And we are so excited that you guys are able to join us on Facebook Live, as well as we are recording this session. My name is Lily Jagosinski, and I'm an event specialist at Move United here. And we are also joined by Abbey Hauser, who is going to be leading us through a Move United Adapt at Home virtual fitness session. This is part of our Training Tip Tuesday series that we are doing, and I'm going to just turn it right over to Abbey to get us started.
Thank you. Like Lily said, I'm Abbey Hauser. I am a certified personal trainer, and I have a functional movement specialist add-on certification to that. A lot of my kind of favorite areas of fitness are when we focus on the ways that our bodies move and building strength so that we're properly moving in all the patterns that we're meant to move in. And to kind of go along with that, I'm a graduate student right now. I'm studying biomechanics, which is essentially like the physics of the human body. So that feeds right into every class that I teach and the things that I do with fitness directly. And that's kind of ties into what we're doing today also, because what we'll be doing is we're focusing on a lot of kind of stabilizing muscles of either the hip or the shoulder, which are your two ball and socket joints, which are super important for mobility, obviously, because if you're using your shoulders to move, they have a lot of degrees of freedom, and so do your hips as they move in the joint in all directions. But with that, you can either have too much mobility in those joints, or you can have too little mobility. And just because a joint moves doesn't mean that we can't make it stable. So as we build up, I know I'm a winter sport athlete, so as we build up into these winter sports season, it's coming up on us quicker than we expect. I want us all to make sure that we're kind of focusing on some stability aspects of these joints so that we have that base joint protection. And stability work is important whether you're an elite athlete or just someone looking to rehab an injury or anywhere in between. So these exercises that we will do after a brief warm-up, they might seem really easy, but the focus is on a lot of your form and kind of using some small muscles to move from there. I'll give options to use your shoulders or your hips for most of them. And the way that we do that is once I give an example that seems like it might work for you, just go ahead and get started. We'll do about 5 reps of each. But I will continue kind of going through different options. So you don't have to wait for me to go through every option if you liked the first one. So because it's video, obviously we cannot correct and just kind of assume who's in the class and teach by that. So if you see something you like, go ahead and start it, and you can ignore me explaining the other versions and just try to get about 5 in there. So with that, we'll get started with just a brief warm up. What we are doing is fairly low impact and focused strength, so we don't need as big of a warm-up as we would for like a high intensity exercise. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to kind of get the top and the bottom of our shoulders or your hips. So we're going to kind of target either side of the joints that we're working on. So to start, we're just going to do the neck, even if you're using your hip here. So we're just going to turn our head from side to side. So you're basically just looking, moving that nose to your right shoulder and then to your left shoulder. We're going in a little bit of a, not quick pattern, but we're not going slow. We're not holding it as part of our warm-up. We're just getting those muscles kind of used to moving, especially if you choose to do some of these shoulder ones that I'm about to show you. The things from your neck and your torso are the muscles that are going to feed right into your shoulders. So we'll do about 2 more on each side. Just nice and in control. Perfect. So next we're going to do a torso twist, which I love a good torso twist. I don't know if anyone else does. But what it involves is if you're seated, you can sit on a chair. You can also do this standing. So it's the same motion. But the main focus is that your hips are going to stay forward. We're just going to rotate our torso. Basically, the top part moves. The bottom part stays steady. So I'm just rotating one way. You can put your hands wherever you want. I prefer them across my body. But basically, I'm rotating from the middle of my spine. If you're twisting from your low back, you're doing it wrong. And if you're kind of feeling like your neck is doing something, you're also targeting the wrong area. So keeping those hips forward will help you feel it right at that rib cage. And we're warming up just some of our spine. We're getting our core ready to move. We'll do 2 more on each side. Perfect. All right, so our last one that we're gonna do for our warm-up is if you're using your hips, what I want you to do is a hip swing. So if you're not familiar with what a hip swing is, basically, or a leg swing, I guess I should say, all you're gonna do is just stand and you're swinging your hip across your body, and then you're switching to swinging it back and forth. So if you're gonna be using your hip for the workout, I want you to focus on that standing option. And then if you're using your shoulders, what we're gonna do is just that simple classic move of some arm circles. I don't have full movement, full range here by this wall. So I'm gonna kind of bend this one arm. But basically I want your focus to be at these shoulders as opposed to kind of moving your arm. I kind of want it to be like a shoulder rotation. Your arms are gonna move with it, but the shoulders are sort of starting the movement, if you will. And then if you've been going one direction, we're gonna switch to the other side. If you're doing your hips, if you've gone forward, make sure you're switching to going backwards now, and then switch to the other leg as well. We're just gonna get those ball and socket joints really moving, gliding a little bit before we get some specific strength going. And I will say that as we get going, if some of these exercises feel too easy, you can make them a little bit harder, but you can also double check your form. A lot of times if a stability exercise feels too easy, especially if it's your first time doing it, odds are your form is just a little bit off and you're kind of recruiting a little bit of accessory muscles to help you out instead of just the one muscle we were looking for. All right, so with that, if you've finished your hips, you should feel either your hips feel pretty warmed up or at least a little bit more movement. Your heart rate might be a little bit higher than it was when we started. And if you're doing your shoulders, you really feel like we've kind of loosened up some of that ball and socket joint and that you feel like your torso is ready. So if you kind of check all those boxes, we're ready for this workout. And the first equipment that we'll use is the red ball from the Move United kit. So if you don't have the red ball, you can use literally anything else that you want that's about medium sized. You can use a yoga block. I put one over there that you can use. All we're using it is as something that we can squeeze. So if you even don't have an exercise ball, you can just put your hands in like the classic praying pose, if you will, and just push against your own hands. The ball just adds a little bit of resistance and a little bit of a challenge. So to get started into that, what we want to start is that we're going to be using our shoulders for this one. Even if you're going to use your hips later, I want this one to be for your shoulders because we all need it after sitting for so long each day. But what you want to do to start this exercise is to rotate your shoulders, I mean. So we're basically going to do like a shoulder roll, and then we're going to shove our shoulders down. So we're getting that proper posture set up. So if you're taking your shoulder blades, when I kind of round my shoulder blades are like this. What we're doing is we're flattening them out and pushing them down. So you're basically going around, flattening, and pulling them down. So that should feel like a little bit of work on its own, especially if you're like me and you sit at your desk all day and you kind of slowly start to hunch over. Rolling your shoulders back, opening your chest, and pulling those shoulder blades together like this is going to feel like a little bit of work. And that's the position that I want you to hold throughout anything that we do with our shoulders. So we're pulling it back. Now we're going to get started. So you're going to put the object that you found from around your house in front of you. You're going to put your hands between it. So now our shoulder blades are back. We're like this. What we're going to do is you're going to squeeze together as hard as you can on this ball. We're not making a movement, but you're going to squeeze as hard as you can. Once you feel like you've locked in that hard pressure, we're going to hold it for 10 seconds. So what we're going to do, again, we've locked our shoulder blades back, so we're pulling back and we're pressing forward. We're kind of challenging our joints there. I'm locked in that movement. Now we're going to go for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Nice. And then relax. And the second part of that movement is we're going to do that hold again, now that we've learned that hold. Again, shoulder blades are back. We're squeezing them together. After we hold, what we're going to do is point our wrists forward and then swing our wrists as back as we can. You will run out of motion, just how our bodies are made. So we're gonna get some of that wrist movement in there, some wrist strengthening, but while we're doing that, you're gonna be, again, pushing forward. So we're continually adding complex patterns here, and you should really be feeling this back at your shoulder blades. The pushing together while also squeezing your shoulder blades is really helping gain some of that stability that those scapula back there really need. So we're gonna go again. We're doing this a total of 3 times. So from here, again, I've locked in those shoulder blades. If you need to re-roll your shoulders back, go ahead and do it. So we've locked them in. They're feeling like they're squeezing. My chest feels like it's really open, like it's a little bit too perfect of posture maybe for a daily life activity, but we're holding it here. We're gonna take that ball and we're gonna squeeze as hard as we can and hold for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now we're gonna keep holding. If you need to release that hold, you can, but we're gonna, and rejoin it, but now we're gonna hold it again, and we're gonna bend those wrists forward, and I'm still squeezing this way while I'm moving forward and back. So I'm squeezing, we're gonna go forward and back. We're gonna do that 3 times. So hold, forward, and back. Nicely done. And then we're gonna hold, forward, and back. Nice. Now you can release that hold. If you were doing that right, you should kind of feel a little bit of a burn back there in those scapula, your shoulder blades, just because we're really holding them back and then we're adding complex movement patterns on top of that. So that's a really good base for stability for anyone. And we're gonna do that pattern one more time, a 10-second hold followed by the movements before we move on to our next exercise. So again, add that shoulder roll, pull those scapula down. If the metaphor helps, I was taught that you want to pretend that you're putting those scapula kind of in your back pocket. So we're sitting up tall and then we're not shrugging our shoulders, we're really pressing them down as if they're gonna fall right into our back pocket. All right, so now that we've got that locked in, shoulder blades are back. I'm actively squeezing them together. So even right now, I'm actively pulling my shoulder blades together. I'm not just sitting here passively. So squeezing those together, and then we're gonna do a hold. So push towards the ball for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. You can relax that hold now. Reset it if you need to. Again, shoulder blades back, squeezing them together. And then we'll move into that last press and wrist motion here. So again, lock those shoulder blades back. Now we're gonna press into the ball for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if you still have the strength to keep holding, we're gonna bend those wrists for 3. So that's 1. Again, you're still pushing into the ball with this one. It might be easy to let go of some of that tension, but we want to make sure we're holding on. Good, and then press forward. Last one here, make sure you're still pressing into that ball. Good, now gently release that hold and you can set it down. So with that one, what we did was we targeted a lot of that shoulder blade, especially in the back of your shoulders and some of that chest opening for that mobility work as well. So again, it's one of those things that felt really easy. Maybe check in that you're squeezing your shoulder blades together properly, or that you are pushing as hard as you can together against your object. It should feel fairly hard. Maybe if you're super used to that kind of motion or fit, it might not have felt as hard for you. But in general, you should at least feel a little bit of fatigue after that. And again, it looks really easy, it looks really simple, and that's kind of how a lot of our stability work is gonna go today. We just have 2 more exercises. But if they look easy, again, it's working on a lot of really small muscles. So it might look really easy, but in fact, you're actually working a lot of important muscles and things to focus on. All right, so next we're gonna use the towel as a slider. So if you have like a hand towel at home or anything else that would slide, if you're on wood floor and you're using your hips, go ahead and put your socks on and just use that. If you're on carpet, you can use like a magazine or a soft cover thin book. That will help you slide as well. If you're using the seated version of this, a towel really will work best. A sweatshirt might work as well, or a t-shirt. But I'll explain the seated one first, and then we'll do the standing option. So the seated one is going to work your shoulders. And what I'm going to do, just for viewing sake, because you will be facing a wall, I'm just going to pretend that there's an invisible wall in front of me, and I'll do the motion. But what you will be doing is taking the towel on the wall. So if you're doing this seated, you can face a wall. So I would spin and face this wall, and I would then use the towel on my hand as a slider. So you would copy the motions I'm about to show you against the wall here. If you also have a tabletop and you're doing it seated, like you're sitting at a kitchen table or something, you can also use the towel and press forward as opposed to upwards. So with that, you're going to take that towel. So I'm not going to hold this the whole time because I will drop it, but I'm going to pretend in my hand that I have that. But while you're doing it seated, what you're going to do is you're going to, again, take those shoulder blades back, pin them together. So again, we're kind of squeezing our shoulder blades down and into those back pockets here. And what you're going to do is take your hand and you're going to lift it as high as you can upwards without kind of releasing that shoulder blade. So you won't be able to go as far as your shoulder can move in general, but we're going as far as we can with that shoulder blade restricted. So we're going to go up, you're going to come back to center, make a diagonal motion forward, back to center, to the side, back to center, bottom diagonal, back to center, down, and repeat the pattern, completing like that star shape that you might make. But the key for this one is that your shoulder blades stay pinned back. So again, if I don't pin my shoulder blades back, I can reach all the way up here. If I keep those shoulder blades pinned, I can move to about here before I need to release that hold. So that's what your focus is, to keep that hold. It might not feel like you're going as far, but you will feel like you're gaining some control of that muscle. So if you're doing the seated version, go ahead and get started with that. I will explain what you can do if you're doing this standing. So if you want to target your hip, what you can do is, again, take the towel as your slider. And there's really two ways you can do this as a kind of a standing seated combo if you want. But you can do this completely seated on the edge and still work your hip and do that same pattern that I just showed you, where you go forward, diagonal, to the side, back diagonal, and repeat all the way through, complete that star. So that's kind of an in-between, but if you really want to get some hip control and some glute work in, what we're going to do is I'm going to grab onto this wall, and there will be an obstacle behind me, so I'm just going to show you the forwards motion here. But basically, you're going to get into a single leg squat. So on one side, I'm basically squatting with just this other leg. My right leg is now going to be on the towel. And from this position, I'm not going to move my upper body. Nothing else is moving except this one hip. And I'm going to point it forwards. I'm going to go forward diagonal, to the side, and back. So everything stays really quiet when you're in this position. So I'm not lunging forward. I'm not moving this back leg at all. I'm really keeping this hip locked in. If you were to look, it really looks like just kind of this knee and hip are the one moving as opposed to anything else on your body. So you would do that, switch legs, and repeat. So those are your kind of, I guess, three options. So there's a fully seated, a standing, or a kind of in-between version. So I want you to do that 3 times on each side, which might take a little bit of time just because of the full matrix that you're going through. So I'm going to do a little bit of the modified one where I'm seated. Again, if you're doing it seated and you're using like a wheelchair as opposed to a regular chair, you will be a little bit restricted in the backwards motion unless you kind of step out to the side here. Hopefully you're in a little bit wider of a space than I am between this cabinet and this door. But again, if you're doing this modified seated one, all you're going to do is that same pattern where we're going to the side and back, kind of like a good 5-way star here. I guess there's 6 since we added that side one. I'm going to take it nice and controlled. I'll just do one more and then I'll switch to the other side. And then you're probably already on your last set by now if you started once you picked one that worked for you. So for that, I'll try the standing one for this last one. So we're just going through that nice full set. If you need to grab onto anything for balance, if you want to try the standing one, but you don't know about your balance, you can always grab onto a chair or a countertop or literally anything that you might want to make it work. Again, I'm limited because I left an obstacle for myself here, but you're definitely trying to get that full matrix going while we move. So it's always straight ahead, straight to one side, and then you do that 45-degree angle, back to a 90-degree angle, and 45. Well, if you like math and would prefer the angles, that is how the breakdown exists. All right, I've got one more. To the side. And I'll do my halfway back and then halfway back again. The back diagonal is usually a little bit tricky, but it's super helpful to get that full range of motion for our hips. Obviously the hip one, it's hard to go straight into your other leg. So adapt as you will. There's really no wrong way to do this. We're just kind of moving our bodies in a nice stable pattern. All right. So maybe you've gotten 3 sets done. I'm not sure. Hopefully, once you get to that 3 is when we'll switch to our final exercise. So if you feel like you've gotten that taken care of, you got that 3, then you're ready to move on. If not, and you're watching this recorded, feel free to pause the video and pick it up again later. But as we move on to this next one, I'm going to show you the hip one first and then the seated one. Seated one's a little bit more kind of complex movement patterns. The hip one's a little bit easier. So the hip one does involve being seated, whether you're a standing athlete or not. So if you have somewhere that you can sit and do this, that will work. There's a way to do it standing, but it does get a little bit trickier to explain without seeing people. So we're just going to stick to the seated one. So even if you're a standing athlete, try to find a chair or something that you can sit off the edge of. But this one, the final one for your hip here, involves basically what we're doing is we're making a pendulum with our knee. So I'm sitting at the edge of my chair, or as edge of the chair as you feel comfortable and stable. And basically I'm lifting this knee. I'm going to try to get my other knee out of the way. Usually it doesn't always work that way, but I'm lifting this foot off the ground. I'm going to mark where my knee is because my pants are black, so it is hard to see. But my knee is staying steady, and you're just taking your ankle kind of towards the sky, and then you're rotating it the other way back towards the sky. So if you're doing the hip version of this one, all we're doing is we're basically making a pendulum with our ankle, but your knee is staying steady. So you're pivoting outward, you're coming back center, and then you're gently pulling it as far as you can into the other way of rotation. So you're going to do about 5 to 7 of those as you feel comfortable. So you're really just moving that. You're not letting that knee move. I'm not swinging all over the place. You're really, that knee is steady. The movement is being driven by your glute back here by your hip. And it's a really small muscle that we're targeting. So if it feels more challenging than it looks, you're probably doing it right. So if you like that hip version, go ahead and get started. Otherwise, we will go ahead and go on for the shoulder one. And from there, the shoulder one, I'm going to use this ball. You don't have to. If I'm being honest, the ball is a little bit big for my hands anyway. So if you want to do what I'm about to do without anything in your hands, go ahead and do that as well. The ball just adds a little bit of weight and a little bit of kind of a challenge for you to physically remember how we're turning our wrists. So to know the shoulder movement, we're going to roll those shoulders back again, pin the shoulder blades down. So you take that nice big shoulder roll, press the shoulder blades down, put them in your back pockets, open up that chest into the kind of posture that probably none of us actually sit or stand in, but the kind that we're told to all our lives. So it should feel really tight. Me holding this position feels like I'm stretching out the front of my chest. So I don't naturally exist in this position, so we're going to work on strengthening that. But again, we're keeping those shoulder blades locked. What we're going to do is you're taking the ball. So again, shoulder blades are locked. You're going to take the ball or your empty hand, whatever you want. And our first step is to, while our elbow is pinned down, to rotate outwards. So just as far as you can go. You're not going to be able to get really to neutral. That's not how our anatomy generally exists. So you're taking it from here, and then you're going to lift it once you've gotten to that furthest position. You're going to lift it as far as you can while keeping that shoulder blade pinned. So again, I can reach further if I unpin that shoulder blade, but I'm still pulling those shoulder blades back and together back here, which means I can go to about here before I feel like I need to unpin them to continue the movement. Once we hit this position, we're going to do what I call the light bulb movement. So it looks like you're twisting a light bulb with your wrist. So if you see my other hand, I'm basically just taking it, palm forward. I'm rotating to palm facing the camera. So basically what you do if you're screwing in a light bulb. So imagine you're doing that motion. While we're up here, we're just going to do that 3 times. It's going to put a little bit of challenge through this shoulder here. So if that feels too intense for you, you can move it straight ahead and do that same light bulb motion when we're not in this extended position. We're going to do that light bulb motion 3 times. 1 more. And then we're gently going to lower it, come back to center, and switch to the other side. So that's the shoulder one. I will be doing that one for the rest of them, but if you like that hip one, where we did the pendulum, go ahead and do that for the hip. And for the shoulder one, there's so many variations that you can do. The main practice that we're doing for the shoulder one is rolling the shoulders back, squeezing them together, and then that light bulb motion. So if you just want to sit here, roll the shoulders back as comfortable as you can, and just do a little bit of that wrist rotation, you can just go ahead and do that. You don't need to lift or do any of the other things. You can really just pick any option. The main focus is pinning those shoulder blades back and then challenging that motion with a little bit of wrist rotation. So again, we're going to take that. Shoulder blades are pinned back. I'm as externally rotated as I feel comfortable. I'm going to lift again. You won't be able to get all the way straight. That's just how our bodies are made. In order to get up straight, the shoulder blade physically has to move. So you're going to go to about where you feel comfortable. We're going to screw in that light bulb 3 times. So that's 1, that's 2 rather, and 3. Nice. Once you feel comfortable again, you're going to lower it back down, back to center, and switch over. We'll do that 2 more times on each side. We're really adding those complex movement patterns in here. Lifting, a little bit of a twist. As gentle as you feel, just make sure those scapula are nice and together. And if you're doing that hip one, make sure that your knee is not moving. If it helps on that hip pendulum to hold your knee, I tend to just hold my knee while I do the pendulum. Go ahead and do that. That helps. Any kind of tactile feedback you can give yourself is really going to be helpful. All right, rotate. Nice light bulb twisting. Again, the point of this one is as you twist, it does change how your bones are in relation to your shoulder joint here. We really want to make sure our shoulders are feeling stable in any position that we might put it in, especially as we head into winter sports season. If you're a skier or a sit skier or any of the combination, we tend to use our arms, and it can exist in very sudden movements, especially if you're trying to stop yourself or you just put it down wrong. So we really need our shoulders to be able to handle kind of any task we put at them, or task we throw at them, rather. So from here, again, that nice rotation, twist, lower it back down, and last one. So we're going to do 1 more on each side. Shoulder blades pinned back. You might be feeling a little bit of fatigue as you go, but we really want those shoulder blades pinned, twisting those shoulders, lowering it back down, back to center, and last one. So again, we're rotating outwards, carefully protecting that shoulder, lifting it forwards, and then we're doing that rotation. So with all of our kind of classic mobility work, our bodies are made for alternating stability and mobility. So basically, if you start at your ankles are very mobile. That's a joint meant for mobility. Your knees are good at keeping you stable. Hips are mobile. Your lower back is supposed to be for stability. Your middle of your spine is for mobility, and so on. So shoulders, mobile, elbows, stable, wrists, mobile. So it's a very functional way of building our bodies. But the second one joint becomes kind of out of whack, it means every other joint has to pick up the speed. So if your shoulders are either too mobile or not mobile enough, it means your elbows or your neck or other muscles in your body are going to start trying to do some of that motion for you, because our bodies will do whatever task we demand of it. It just might not do it correctly. So these little motions that we're doing, so this lifting and this twisting, might feel super easy, but we're really training those muscles to work properly. So with that, if you've done the pendulums on your hips and you've done the shoulder movements, That is the end of our sort of base set. So now we're just going to do a brief cool down, and then we will all be on our way. So with that cool down, we worked our shoulders. So I want to make sure that we're kind of keeping those shoulders healthy and loose. So we're going to do the classic, just reach across your chest movement. So all you're doing is pulling it across. If it feels too intense, you can keep your elbow bent and sort of only move from the elbow and move your hand kind of towards the back. I prefer this way a little bit. Sometimes if you go from here, it can feel like you're pulling that muscle and that joint a little too far. But if you take away a little bit of that lever arm, it's really going to help strengthen it. But we just want to push on that elbow. You want to feel it through the shoulder capsule, just nice and gentle. We're not kind of holding it here for too long. We're just letting our shoulders know that we're done demanding them right now. And we're going to switch to the other side. Again, feel free to bend your elbow if that feels better for you. You can keep it straight if that feels also better for you. Again, whatever works for your body feels good. Go ahead and go for it. All right. So that loosened up a little bit of that. We are going to do another torso twist, but I will say if you worked your hips and just did those pendulums, your glutes are going to be sore for sure. So we're going to do a brief glute stretch if you can. So what we're going to do is just put our ankle on top of our knee, kind of make that figure 4 stretch, if you will. And if you're doing this standing, you can sit down and do this seated. It's a very common sort of glute stretch, but if you're doing this seated, we're just kind of in this nice hip opening position. And if you feel comfortable enough, if this doesn't feel like enough of a stretch, we're just going to gently lean forward. You might not have seen me lean forward at all. I moved about an inch. That makes it feel plenty intense for me. My glutes are always super tight. So we're just going to hold it here. Once you feel that kind of intense, we're just going to hold it for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Nicely done. Now we're going to gently unpretzel ourselves and start again on the other side. So again, even if you didn't do the hip motion, this is always a good stretch if you're a seated athlete. Also, and you have the capability to move in this way, getting those glutes stretched out is always nice, especially as we go about the rest of our day. So again, if this doesn't feel intense enough, what you're going to do is just gently lean forward. I tend to like pull myself forward here. Again, I don't move very far. That's okay. Hold it for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, and then we just are going to end with a torso twist, and then you are good to go. So again, same like we did for the warm-up. I love a good torso twist, but keeping those hips facing forward. The goal is to move your thoracic spine, which is basically from the rib. I always just say the rib cage level. So if you feel like you're twisting at the rib cage, you're doing it right. So we're going to rotate. If you want, you can take your hand, put it on your opposite knee if you're doing this seated. Pull it a little bit further. But the key is the hips stay forward. We are not moving our lower back here. We end up with a lot of low back pain because the middle of our back doesn't move correctly. So then the lower back, which is made for stability, ends up having to be mobile if our thoracic spine isn't doing its job. And that's when we end up with a lot of dysfunction in general. So for any athlete that uses their core and their spine, that thoracic mobility is key here. So we're going a little bit slower than we did for the warm-up because we're cooling down. We'll just do one more on each side and then you're on your way. Take a nice deep breath, relax those muscles as you twist. Nice and gentle. And last one here. Again, we're never forcing our body to move. We're just kind of letting it guide where it wants to take us. It's a great thing about mobility work is that you learn a lot about your body and how it moves. All right, so you should be feeling a little bit looser. Maybe some of that scapula burning that you might have felt during our shoulder exercises maybe is a little bit tamed down. But other than that, if you want to foam roll on your own, take care of those shoulder blades. But otherwise, I really appreciate you joining me, and I really hope to see you another time. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. This is Lily from Move United speaking again. And we really want to say we appreciate the time that you've put into these exercises. I think it's so important to have stability on there. And a lot of times we're so hunched over on our computers that just to take a moment and really focus on our muscles and what's actually working is fantastic. So this is a perfect way to start our Tuesday morning. I know that you have social media as well, and you also post some things on there about exercises. Feel free to share your handle and any way that people can follow you online.
Yeah, so I'm mainly on Instagram. It's at Owning the Story. And I have a blog that's called Owning My Story. Very confusing blog to Instagram switch. But if you find me on at Owning the Story on Instagram, you can always message me for fitness tips. I usually share some different chair workouts and things, and just kind of life in general as an adaptive athlete. But I'm always available for help or more questions or working with you one-on-one. So feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. Well, this session is recorded. We will be uploading it to our Move United YouTube page, our Move United Adapted Home Resource Library page as well, and we're streaming to Facebook Live too, so you can catch it on all three of those platforms. So if you weren't able to tune in live, you're able to catch it later, and I'll probably be doing these as well because I need to step away from the computer and kind of think about what I'm doing with my upper body. So we really appreciate it. And with that said, then tune into next week's Training Tip Tuesday. We'll post on our social media as well for our next athlete. And Abby, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome.